Natural and subjective taste. Taste is objective through the self that tastes, the self which is a concrete embodiment of the idea, freedom. Through the idea, taste is also objective in relation to the aesthetic object, for beauty is also an embodiment of the idea. One can only perceive and experience beauty to the extent that one is free, that one is idea. More radically, one is a self to the extent that one is idea, for one is oneself only to the extent that one is free and determines oneself. Put another way, one can correctly state that taste is necessarily the tasting of the self in an object, and as such, the perception of beauty is inextricable from self. The self is both intensive and extensive at one and the same moment. Concerning aesthetic taste, this self is more than the conscious self. It includes the unconscious, and further, it includes the very constitution and determination of the body and the mind itself. The human being is essentially spirit, an entity that is more than a material body in its life, a mental being. Taste may be determined as natural, subjective, objective, and absolute. In the matter to be dealt with here, the determinations of natural, subjective, and objective are almost synonymous and interchangeable if one does not maintain clear what level of abstraction one is thinking from and of. The natural can, depending on context, mean either the determination of taste for the idea, which partially appears as nature, or it can also mean the taste which results from the given character of the body in the unconscious and unreflective mind. These both are objective in nature. Natural taste and the taste for nature. The immediacy of taste as natural, that which generates in us pleasure at immediate sight and hearing, has to do with the very way the mind is structured and connected. Beauty's recognition requires that the self itself be constituted and determined in such a way that rationality is not only connected to the sensuous faculties and the faculties of taste, desire, pleasure, and pain, as one may readily find and conceive in the pleasure of symbolism, but rather in that the faculties of sensing and pleasure are themselves in rational form such that one does not have to consciously cognize to recognize. Instead, the very form of the mind is already set up to immediately recognize by virtue of its being. Much like a hole shaped like a square is by its very being already receptive to a square shaped object passing through it, or much like a rod resonates with another by virtue of their mere material determination. Natural taste is not mediated by consciousness and cognition. The self is itself already constituted in a sensuous rationality which recognizes or resonates with itself as the external, beautiful object. This rationality of the senses themselves is behind the pleasure of the likes of geometric forms, sounds related in quantitative ratios, and the qualitative order and relation of such things as colors. Natural taste is not conceptual nor conscious, and the immediacy of such has been described up to now concerning immediate external objects of nature. There is, however, also a natural, in a common sense of it, subjective immediacy. Beyond the formal aspect of external beauty, there is an internal aspect in which sensuous appearances are imbued with feelings of pleasure and pain by the subject based on character affinities. These too are immediate and natural insofar as they are determined by the natural inclinations of temperamental character, and so are unreflective and unconscious determinations of taste. Egoic beauty, subjective taste, and taste for self. One absorbed in the consideration of the immediate, intensive self, the merely immediate individuality of feeling, its history and self conception, has a taste for artistic objects which present and represent this immediate individuality of the self. This taste is what one would call subjective taste, in that the object of taste is the empirical and rationally comprehended subject itself in the immediacy of its existential being. The taste for the immediate self is the taste for what is pertinent to my immediate realities, my feelings, my hopes, my dreams, my pain, my despair, and my love. This conception also aligns with high fidelity to what is meant by the common notion of subjective taste as taste that is merely determined by one's own individual contingencies of inclination. Now, if the subject's taste accords with what the subject is, how then can we account for the reality of individuals which have a taste for art which they otherwise seem to have no affinity for? One can and must object that while someone evil has a taste for the art of evil, we also know well that good people likewise have a taste for the same, and that even those of highest evil seem to sometimes have genuinely humanistic aspirations and longings despite their clear cruelty. How can this be? Does taste really concern subject truth? A murderer may be obsessed with murder mystery stories, and so can a rather common non murderous person. How can we comprehend this unity of taste if the objective subject is the measure of taste? In one sense, a form of subjectivity is shared despite the external reality being quite different, and at the same moment, the subjectivity is essentially different despite the shared interest. A murderer has a taste for the element of murder itself and the fantasy of getting away with it, while the common person has a taste for the morbid element of dark mystery and justice. There is undeniably the normal person who has fantasies of murdering, but for whom the allure is the taboo nature of such an act and not the act itself. Here we are turning strongly to subject matters brought to significant light in breadth and depth by psychoanalysis in general, particularly the relation of reality and fantasy for subjects. The person obsessed with taboo topics and usually distasteful morbid fantasies is by and large not the kind of person that can go through on these fantasies without finding the reality of fantasy a living hell instead of a heaven of pleasures. Regret sets in for various reasons, the most important being the realization that what we believe we wanted is in fact not at all what we really wanted. Does this fantasizer then really share the same subjective essence as the one that revels in such dark deeds? Certainly not. The nature of their taste may superficially be shared in the appearance of the artwork and its craft, but they do not really relate to it in the same way, nor is their ultimate relation to it as a truth the same. A murderer and brute may like violence and murder to be sure, but they do not necessarily have to find the art of such attractive. Various reasons can lead to this curious reality. Some simply like to distance their normal life from their dark deeds, or sorry, desiring not to think over or be presented with their deed, nor something like it after the fact. The desire wells up, it is satisfied and forgotten. Some simply find observing boring. Why read or watch when the doing is far better? To give a wonderfully aesthetic example, the main character of Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, Alex, is a young thug who enjoys all manner of crime from theft to rape to ultra-violence. Yet aesthetically, he is a refined aristocrat and loves Ludwig van Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Such a striking difference of character and taste seem to immediately deny that the thesis that what subjects are, they have a taste for. After all, one may say, isn't Beethoven's music of refined high taste, of perhaps nearly divine character? How could it be that such a person who could love the ninth, eh, oh, sorry, how could it be that such a person could love the ninth if they themselves are not reflective of such a matter? To answer such requires the reiteration of something already mentioned above. Taste is not a one-dimensional affair. There are various levels of taste. Alex's taste can be explained either by one, the natural taste of a finer than normal aesthetic sense of sound, or two, his conceiving Beethoven's ninth to be a sound in accord with the essence of what he is and does, an essence which is true yet most base and undivine in his development of it. The portions of the Ninth Symphony and the images associated to Alex's act and imagination tell of how he interprets the otherwise vague meaning of the music, a meaning which he seemed to identify with a chaotic game of power which in his own life was manifest in the visage of his abuses and crimes. He was a maniac dancing and singing in the devilish joy of destroying others, their tranquility and happiness. Certainly Alex is a character that is portrayed as deeply troubled and troubling, a self that is in itself wrong, as the personality that he is, and one that is not truly rational. Neither the murder mystery fan nor Alex pose a threat to the conception of taste as the self's own structure. They only reveal that this is a most complex matter, which in any individual case is to be analyzed and unraveled carefully. Can taste differ from essential? Sorry. Can taste differ from essential self? Another example showing the seemingly opposing realities of taste and the self is an anecdote about an acquaintance of mine from high school who loved over the top gore and violence in movies and video games, yet was quite calm and prone to avoid real violence whenever possible. This acquaintance had a taste for the most bombastic violence and gore, Rambo being his favorite movie series, and Doom his favorite video. favorite video game series. Despite this strange taste, he had no violent tendencies towards others, no anger problems. His family and he were well adjusted, and never did he say or do anything that implied he fantasized about such things beyond some rather hilarious dreams of world saving killing sprees against demons. There are tastes that one could say are appearances, nothing true about us. Desensitized as he was, and as all Americans seem to be, to fictional violence, no matter how visually realistic, this was not experienced as being at all the same as real violence and gore, which still carried the impulse of disgust and recoil. What then do we make of the essence of his character, his self? There are tastes which are only desirable in playful make believe, where one can bracket out the horror which would be obvious in any recognition of reality. It is only an extreme abstraction of the same taste which makes us enjoy the tortures and mutilations of cartoon characters in clearly unreal works like the Looney Tunes. It is violence, but it is not real violence. It is abstract violence which does not touch the real world, a mere appearance with no substance. We can say, therefore, that this taste, morbid as it is only a superficial aspect of the self. Yet, it also reveals the truth of the self. To clarify what is meant here, let us see an extreme example with what Immanuel Kant said of animal cruelty. Even if animals have no rights and are entirely subject to human dominion, there is something about cruelty towards animals which simply should not be indulged, even if it could be negatively justified by argument that, though it is not right, it is not by that fact wrong. In analogy, such a person can claim that their violence towards animals is not real cruelty, much like Descartes allegedly claimed when he nailed a dog to a board and vivisected it before students, claiming that the yelps of pain were only a mechanical reaction of the dog body, but not a sign of pain. Is there something, sorry, is there not something of peculiar inconsistency here with what we claim about what is moral or ethical in what we do? It is said that it is fine to relish in things which are bad if only they are fantasies, mere appearances. No one is being hurt after all, so it isn't really morally or ethically bad, even if it does strike one as weird, morbid, and disturbing. These superficial tastes are, despite being superficial, very strange and hard to quit addictions for people in general. It tells that one believes that one has duties to others in public, but there can be no duties to oneself in private. It tells that one believes that there is a real possible abstraction between fantasy and reality, such that fantasy can be indulged without any fear of overbleed into reality. This abstraction of the self, bracketed away from the rest of the world, is ultimately a fiction, no matter how successful one is at maintaining the barrier. An individual cannot indulge their wildest and most depraved fantasies in the privacy of their own imaginations without it so twisting their self and its habituated taste that eventually the desire to try to sorry, let me read that. An individual cannot indulge the wildest and most depraved fantasies in the privacy of their own imaginations without it so twisting their self and its habituated taste that eventually the desire to try the real thing is alluring. The slippery slope, however, is not the point, only that such superficial tastes are in fact nowhere as superficial as we all claim. I can quit any time, says every addict. I just don't want to, and why should I? Well, dear addicts, indeed, why should one indulge what one knows wrong at all? Only in a very peculiar kind of society does the representation and presentation of what is evil, what is wrong, what is base get played off with a wave of hand as if it is a mere smear that is no different a pleasure than eating burgers today or salad tomorrow. On taste as deepest truth of self or desire. As a person who is just cannot and will not stand injustice, so too does the aesthete that truly is what they are find themselves incapable of appreciating the beauty of that which stands opposite of their being. As we are, so we think. As we think, so we are. It is inescapable that beauty fall into subjectivity just as it rises to objectivity, for it is itself a power and mirror of subjectivity made object. It is no surprise then that concrete subjectivity is what draws the observer of art. The subjectivity that draws us in, however, is in the deepest sense our subjectivity, our individual idea. I may recognize the greatness and beauty of Bach's works, but they are not the most beautiful to me. Why? We find overwhelmingly that what most consider the most beautiful is that which reflects their deepest personal essence in a form recognizable for the subject. Purely subjective taste is the recognition of my ego in works of art. What agrees with my taste is what agrees with my personal idea of truth. The dynamic principle which gives living impulse to my will as a desire as well as my conception of truth. It is no secret that one has a taste based on one's character. Someone who is introspective and melancholy will more easily grasp and gravitate towards beauty which embodies these ideas. Someone who is extroverted and the partying type will gravitate more easily and more easily grasp the beauty of high energy and flash. Someone educated and erudite may appreciate the beauty of transcendental poetry or complex music, while someone from the projects is far more likely to appreciate the beauty of gangster rap. The self is never truly one dimensional, and so people, in fact, tend to have tastes broader than they present to others or which they themselves realize. Even two who find the same object tasteful find themselves drawing different meaning from the same works and experiences, not because they see something different out there, but because they focus on something different which is there for the eye ready to perceive it. One can even present a veritable contradiction. One can be a quiet introvert that loves high energy music and a rave atmosphere, and one can be the opposite combination as well, though both are rare. These examples are, however, misleading, for they offer only immediate art, mere feeling as the one we speak of. And this is not the case. Here it may be misunderstood we're talking about merely liking sound, but what is meant is liking the meaning. One may very well like Bach for sounding nice, but one can also like Bach because it sounds divine. One can like rock because it sounds freeing. One can like Tool because it sounds aspirational and inspirational, and more importantly, because the song with lyrics means this and sounds it as well. Immediately subjective taste. The taste for the self is exactly this. It is the unconscious and conscious focus on one's individual desires and fate. To reiterate what was stated earlier, it is my hopes and dreams, my way of life, and so on. Taste for the self is a taste for that which reflects and confirms my preoccupations and interests as an abstraction from whatever else goes on in the world of importance to anyone else, or for the importance of certain objectivities of life. This is a kind of taste which is often called projection, the kind of taste in which falls so-called male power fantasies, female romance novels and films, love songs, mood songs, etc. In such works, what is often liked is the fantasy element of projecting oneself into the artwork, and more importantly, of the artwork reflecting oneself. There is in these works no reflection whatsoever about conditions or essences of their subject matters. The works are as immediate as the feeling self and are fantasy. For example, the appearance of romance without questions of what romance is or should be, the appearance of my self-loathing and rage without reflections of why and what to do about it. Such tastes in artworks are for the self to indulge itself in its immediate emotions, an immediate catharsis, but one that has no further purpose. This subject is the kind that immediately asserts its pleasure and displeasure without any attempt to understand and expand taste. Things are immediately good or immediately bad, and that is the end of discussion. Socially immediate taste. The self is not simply the immediate embodiment of the individual self, but also the social web that constitutes it. There is a general contingent subjectivity of tradition, which is a social given, just as there is an individual contingent subjectivity, which is a natural given, character and affinities. Individuals can identify themselves with an abstraction of a group identity all the way from local cliques to international groupings based around a supposedly shared universal trait, whether it be cultural or biological. To continue the examples of taste in art, one can easily look at movements which seek to return to their roots and to glorify tradition for no other reason than that it is considered the authentic identity and culture of a people. Americans in their nobody can tell me what to do attitude has survived healthily, have survived healthily despite decades of ever-changing sound and movie styles. The substance is always there, from personal battles to artwork, which pretends to speak for the historical moment. America, fuck yeah, from Team America World Police, is unironically a favorite of almost any American if one scratches them even just slightly in a genuinely oppositional way. This kind of taste may seem to begin making inroads towards a notion of taste for the objective, for something external which constitutes oneself. This is true, but here the movement is not concrete, it is merely abstract. Whereas for the individually immediate, there is only their individuality. For the socially immediate, there is only their sociality. The traditional individual collapses himself into an abstract identity where the individuality does not exist and cannot be conceived to exist. An American is an American. They like America and what is American, or they are cast out. It is not just America, however, but mass non thinking everywhere. Every instance of groupthink and its obsession with identity and its preservation, its authenticity, is another instance of a subject obsessed with itself in the guise of universality within a group. The genuine movement beyond subjective taste and taste for the immediate self is in the development of consciousness to its awareness of sociality as its condition. However, at first, this is subjectivity made object to another unconscious object. In seeing that the immediate self is not absolute, this consciousness shifts its conceptions and desires towards objective realities, which, even if they are conceived as natural or socially grounded forms of life, beauty's highest point at such a level no longer lies in the individual's immediate sensations and struggles, but social realities from which the individuals arise. The consequence of immediate taste, immediate art. What is termed popular art is unsurprisingly overwhelmingly of this kind. One can expect it to be so precisely because this is the broadest, most immediate, and lowest bar of artistic accessibility. One need not know anything except the immediate experience. There's nothing to reflect on in the subject matter. A standard melody, an easily repeatable and pleasant chord progression like rock's famous four chord, easily listenable with no work required by the ear and awareness to appreciate its complexity and texture. A typical love song is always the same more or less substance-wise. A common rock anthem, etc. Kiss made a fortune writing literally by the book rock songs, regurgitating what rock culture superficially was at the time. Country top hits are variations of the same song almost to a T, such that variation is hardly there. Pop hits are literally pop precisely because they reflect the general social zeitgeist, and we have a zeitgeist of immediate satisfaction. We literally live in the age of the abstract subject, the immediate subject. Society produces a populace that knows no history, knows no genetic thinking, and knows only abstractions of itself and its world, abstractions which are deemed to be ahistorical and eternal truths, which are self-evident but with but minor immediate reflection. Our lives affirm this truth. Therefore, we conceive that it is so everywhere and at all times, and that there is nothing more to it than the brute fact. Insofar as we remain limited in our personal self-actualization as spiritual beings, to that extent we remain limited in taste for the beautiful. We all know and have encountered such people, those who shape their lives along a singular, simple aesthetic. The punks, the rockers, the goths, the hipsters, etc. These are recognizable both by their systematically simple and general look, but also by their unfortunately limited world outlooks and tastes. Such individuals so tie themselves to one aesthetic that they never go beyond it to anything else, never encounter any other art outside of their genre, and therefore never encounter themselves in new ways through stepping into new domains of experience. The art of immediacy is important. It is a reality we live with, and it expresses something true about themselves, about ourselves. Nonetheless, when it becomes our sole obsession and focus, it becomes clearly dangerous. A people which can only conceive the world under the lens of their immediate egoic desires and pursuits, and which seeks only to see themselves expressed in art, are a people that can easily be turned into a collective ego, finding in it the strength and recognition which is afforded by a mass movement and consciousness. The self collapses into the universal and becomes a readied weapon at the call of the aesthetic master of rhetoric, the maestro of fascism. It is not the content and form of this art which is in itself wrong, however, but the mistaking it as the highest. The height of subjective art calls upon individuals to develop and reflect on their experience of errors. However, it cannot genuinely speak to anything but problems originating in a subject. Anything like external conditions and causes cannot be considered and shown as themselves requiring a solution in order to solve the very genesis of many problems within subjects. Take, for example, the pop song I Saw the Sign by Ace of Spades. It states two important truths: that understanding is required to move on from personal problems, and that problems internal to the self cannot be solved by anyone else. That it is in the will and judgment of a self that the movement to a higher development occurs. Quote, no one's going to drag you up to get into the light where you belong. End quote. The power of development is given to seeing the sign of error, but no explanation can be given to the original blindness to this sign other than personal failure to see it, a failure of will or an inherent stupidity of the subject. The realization that the subject's very content and form originates in an other external to them, that constitution is the origin of determination, reveals the subject as an object.